When did the depression start?
When I was a child.
Really? So you were dealing with it your whole life?
My whole life. Oh, completely. So some of those years, like when I was dating Bill or when I would be moving, those were some of the worst years.
Because it was so stressful, because you didn't have friends.
And because I was unmedicated then. Yeah, I didn't start taking medication until about 3 years ago.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Wow. About 27.
Did you try other methods? You tried 5-HTP?
I tried some things. And I've been in therapy my whole life. My parents first put me in therapy when they first started to decide that they were thinking about getting a divorce. And I was young then. I was maybe 6 or 7. So from the time I remember, I've understood the therapeutic process, and they always really promoted that in me. So then even after the divorce and the remarriages and all of that, I started doing the therapy thing on my own. Then when I went to college, and I was very much on my own. I went to college when I was 16, by the way, and lived on my own at 16. I was a fucking weird kid. Yeah. So I was I'm an adult, but I wasn't. I did that. I went to therapy. I did all those things by myself, but I always had this mental block. I always had this I don't need meds. Meds means you're really crazy. Meds means you really don't have control. And not until I kind of hit a very bad rock bottom maybe 3 years ago, did I finally say, you know what, fuck it. I think I actually have to do this. I think it would be good for me. And then it was the same experience that I've heard over and over and over from people, where finally they get on the meds that are right for them and they calibrate to their dosage, and maybe they've been on it for about 2 months, and they just have this epiphany of why the fuck did I wait so long? I could have felt like this my whole life. What the fuck was I thinking? Because you're so societally, we're so resistant to looking at mental illness the same way we look at physical illness. It's so easy. Paul Gilmartin just made this point when he was on my podcast last week. If you went up to somebody with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and you were like, what the fuck, dude? Why don't you just think more positively so that your pancreas makes more insulin? What's wrong with you? Why can't you just make more insulin? It's like, they'd be like, what are you talking about? It's the same thing with depression. People put the onus on, they look at it like it's a disease of will, but it's not. It's a biological illness. And that's just very hard for people to understand. And so what you end up doing is carrying around a lot of guilt and shame and a lot of feelings like, I'm not good enough. I can't will myself out of this. If I just think more positively, it's not about that. And I did that for years. You just deal with it. And I destroyed, so many relationships.
Wow. Yeah. I can only imagine being trapped in that scenario.
Yeah.
But I'm also very sensitive to the variables that different people go through with their bodies. I have hypothyroidism. I have to take thyroid medication. It runs in my family. My mother has it.
My mom has it too.
Yeah. And I know I used to get headaches. These weird headaches at the end of the day where I was like, I'm so fucked. I could fall asleep, and it wasn't like I was now I get tired, I go to sleep. But it was like I could fall asleep just watching TV and be out for 8 hours. It didn't make any sense. It was like a weird tired, I was in pain. So, and I get these weird headaches. And then once I finally got on medication, it was like, whoa.
Night and day.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, this is what other people feel like.
Right.
I thought I was normal, because that's another thing. There's such a stigma in this country, not just about mental illness, but about any sort of illness, where people can't openly, freely talk about it. So you end up living in this weird bubble where you don't I know people that have mental illness that didn't even realize they had mental illness until they finally had a conversation with a doctor about it, and they were like, oh, this isn't normal? Not everybody doesn't hear voices, or everybody doesn't. It's yeah, because you're so afraid to talk to somebody about it. So that's a really important part of this, I think, is just getting past the stigma. That's why when something like this with Robin Williams, which is so fucking depressing, happens, a lot of people rally around it and they say, hey, maybe we can use this as a teaching moment, because this guy, no matter how good his life was, he had this thing that he ultimately couldn't kick, and it wasn't his fault. It just is that way sometimes. And hey, maybe you have it too. I think in some ways it's good when high-functioning people come out and talk about their illnesses, because then people who are actually experiencing things like loss of employment, loss of a loved one, whatever, or who have had a bad go of it for other reasons, are like, even you, like you had said before, even you, but you're pretty, but you're successful, you're whatever. Well, if you could have that, then of course it's not weird that I have, you know? It's like, it's a good thing for people to be able to see that they're not alone like that.
Yeah. And it's also, there's a bunch of people that attribute other people's depression really irresponsibly to a bunch of different things.
Oh,
They'll
yeah.
say like, oh, I had a guy on the podcast last week that was saying that Robin Williams killed himself because his ex-wives took all his money.
As if he knows it all.
Well,
anything about it. Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm so glad you're such an expert on
He
this.
was saying that it was a women's addiction to free stuff that was caught. It was so...
That's horrible. And it makes you want to be like, who the fuck are you to presume that you know what's happening in somebody else's head? Ever.
Not only that, it's insanely irresponsible to go against the grain of science and medicine, which is clearly established that it's an illness.
It's an illness. Yeah. And I think that that's something, too, that a lot of people don't understand. The same way we're so comfortable with concepts of diagnosis and cure because we're so used to things like flu, cold, tonsil infection, whatever, where you take an antibiotic or you take an antiviral or you just wait and your immune system clears the disease. We're used to catching things and then eliminating them. But when you have disease states that are process states like cancer, like diabetes, like mental illness, there's no cure per se. Like I got a tweet just earlier today from somebody who was like, blah, blah, blah. Have you ever thought about blah, blah, blah to cure your depression? It's like, I'm not cured of depression because I take citalopram. I'm in treatment.
That's fascinating.
I'll be in treatment the rest of my life.
Do you believe, as a person who's a neuroscientist, is it possible that they could eventually come up with something that balances your brain out instead of just adding something to your neurochemistry, which sort of enhances your serotonin levels, but rather something that where they can get it at a genetic level?
I hope so. I mean, I really hope so. We're starting to see major improvements in cancer biology with personal genomic medicine. My fear with genomic medicine is only, not to put a dark cloud on it because I think that it has amazing prospects. My fear is that it's going to further increase the kind of class divide where you've got people who are sick because sickness strikes rich and poor the same. But for some reason, we are a very class-based system, and I think that you're going to see that rich people get those kinds of treatments and poor people don't.